right. Good morning, everyone. I am Billy Bob. It is 9 a.m. here on the west coast of the United States. I've got my regular co-hosts, Ian Kummer from a suburb in Moscow. I believe it's 8 p.m. Am I correct? This time, 8 p.m.
7
7 p.m.
Because we don't have daylight savings time here, so you guys
nice.
get back and forth. Well, I've missed a couple of shows or been late to a couple of shows by accident because actually same with Ben when in Hungary because they don't have it either. You guys in America just switch, and then the rest of us don't necessarily realize it because it's very local.
They're talking about getting dispensing with the whole daylight savings time. I mean, I wouldn't mind if they get rid of that whole thing. It's kind of confusing. But at the same time, who wants to go to work in the dark, and start working when it's still dark? Anyway,
who wants to lose an hour of sleep? I remember that.
Right.
It's cool to gain an hour of sleep, but you have to lose one also.
And I've got Carlo Parcelli, Satan's Anus, Washington, D.C. It is noontime there, and our two special guests. We got Leo Zhao from East Berlin, 6 p.m. in East Berlin, I believe, and Greg Rosen from Chicago, Illinois, 11 a.m. there. We entitled today's program, Will Trump Nuke Iran? I think, to me, that's an open question. I think there's two primary schools of thought about that. It seems that definitely Trump has threatened and is threatening to use nukes. He's definitely has not said, oh, we would never use nukes. Nukes are off the table. No, he said that Iran's nuclear program must get destroyed. And, the conventional wisdom is the only thing that can destroy Iran's nuclear program is nuclear bunker busting weapons. But so either this is what is it called? Full pressure tactics. We are threatening. We want everybody to believe that we're crazy enough to use nukes, hoping to get Iran to concede or surrender, or we're serious. And if other options fail, we will use nuclear weapons to destroy Iran's nuclear program. So is it just a pressure tactic? I mean, is Trump going to chicken out? As he always does. I don't know. It's a tough bet to take, but it's interesting that Tulsi Gabbard recently put out a 1.5-minute long clip about nuclear weapons. And I wanted to play that and then, have the discussion on the other side of this clip. So bear with me as I do my best to share this screen. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, no, we're having technical issues right off the bat. So some reason because I just did it before in the lobby, I was able to do it. Share screen. Here we go. No, I'm just streaming our entire screen. Okay, we're going to try this. You're going to see my entire screen, and I'm going to make this.
Political elite and war. I recently visited Hiroshima in Japan and stood at the epicenter of a city that remains scarred by the unimaginable horror caused by a single nuclear bomb dropped in 1945, 80 years ago. It's hard for me to find the words to express what I saw, the stories that I heard, the haunting sadness that still remains. This is an experience that will stay with me forever. Yet this one bomb that caused so much destruction in Hiroshima was tiny compared to today's nuclear bombs. The bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima had a yield of just 15 kilotons of TNT, whereas today's nuclear warheads range in size from 100 kilotons to over 1 megaton. A single nuclear weapon today could kill millions in just minutes. Just one of these nuclear bombs would vaporize everything at its core. This is the reality of what's at stake, what we are facing now. Because as we stand here today, closer to the brink of nuclear annihilation than ever before, political elite and warmongers are carelessly fomenting fear and tensions between nuclear powers. We must reject this path to nuclear war and work toward a world where no one has to live in fear of the nuclear holocaust.
Were you guys able to see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. We didn't just have a minute and a half of, because I wasn't able to do both. So, okay. So now I want to set up one more clip, and it's basically Trump saying, I don't care what Tulsi Gabbard says, right? So let me play that clip, and then we can, let's see. Present share screen. I'm going to share the entire screen, and I'll have to pull it up. So bear with me here. Okay. So where is it? It's coming up. It's coming. Okay, right here. Okay, so you can see that Trump doesn't really find Tulsi that influential. He's kind of dismissive of what she says. The last thing I would like to read is a letter from not Mike Pompeo, a letter from Mike Huckabee. So look at this. This is a letter from Mike Huckabee to Donald Trump. And, Mike Huckabee is an ardent Christian Zionist. Mr. President, God saved you in Butler, Pennsylvania, to be the most influential president in a century and perhaps in all of history. The decisions that fall upon your shoulders, I would not want any other person to make. There are many voices speaking to you, sir, but there's only one voice that matters, his voice. I am your appointed servant in this land, and I am here for you, but I do not try to be in your presence too much because I trust in your intuition. There's been no president in my lifetime in a position similar to yours, not since Truman in 1945. I am not communicating to convince you, only to encourage you. I believe you will hear a voice from heaven, and that voice is far more important than mine or anyone else's. You sent me to Israel to be your eyes, ears, and voice, and to ensure our flag flies over our embassy. My mission is to be the last to leave. I will not abandon this position. Our flag will not be lowered. You did not seek this moment. This moment sought you. It is my honor to serve you. So that is some real crazy messianism. It's Christian fundamentalism. It's batshit, but there's a lot of true believers. And so I hear Iran being demonized a lot because of their they're a religious theocracy in part. And, the fact that, they're willing to be martyrs and that fact is weaponized against them to demonize them. But people need to be cognizant that we have our own whack jobs. And I wouldn't characterize Iran as being a whack job country. Like they're literally defending themselves from aggression like anybody would. But it's the United States and, the Christian Zionism plays a big role in in the current aggressive policies against Iran. So do you guys think that it's a bluff? Is the nuclear thing, is it a full pressure tactic, to try and get Iran to concede, or is it a possibility that we could see the United States very quickly? So the other thing is all these refueling air tankers are flying over to the Middle East. Other air squadrons are going over to the Saudi Arabian air base. Like it really seems like they're preparing to enter into the conflict. Personally, I think it's a given, right? Like, there was a point in time that the United States was not willing to give javelins to Ukraine. And it was too big of a step. We're not going to do it. But ultimately, we did that and a lot more. And I think it's the same thing with regards to Iran. Like, first of all, nobody's even saying we're not going to get involved. To me, I think it's just a matter of time. And I think it's a matter of short time because Israel's sustaining some heavy damage. And so I think the United States very quickly, within the next day or two, I expect to see them bombing. But that's my prediction. What do you guys think?
Can I just start off by saying something about objectively geopolitics and what's happening in the world is so interesting because it is so unpredictable. I mean, we have even ardent Marxists who approach it from a scientific, rational point of view can miss factors, right? Um, it's like watching a tree grow. We don't know. We cannot predict which direction precisely the each branch is going to go. I mean, roughly, probably on this side, in out from the trunk, but which shape we cannot predict. It's a little bit like that. I was completely theoretically right. We in terms of patterns, fitting the pattern of the empire, always using proxies, that it does not enter into wars um, directly with its own troops on the ground or airplanes in the air. And that goes for its vassals, the EU as well. Against Russia, it has not dared to enter directly into the conflict and only uses its rabid fascist proxy. There is every reason to believe that this pattern will hold or does hold for Iran as well, and for China, right? Because there is a rabid fascist proxy right there for the empire to use. But there are always black swans, and they are so unpredictable. Until yesterday, I was completely convinced that the U.S. would never dare, for a variety of reasons, because of domestic instability, of the very strong anti-war movements inside the U.S., in the EU, in every country of the European Union, and as well as international legitimacy, which these liberal democracies are rapidly losing, has almost completely lost. And so, for them to directly enter into a illegal war, another illegal, blatantly illegal war this time, maybe even more blatant than Iraq, on behalf of a genocidal entity, which the world opinion is rapidly shifting against, completely, just like in the 1980s with regard to apartheid South Africa. So all of these factors combined, there would be plenty of rational argument for the pattern of using proxies and no direct conflict holding. But yet, yesterday we see massive deployment. From what it looks like, absolutely, there's no doubt that the U.S. is going to enter directly and it's going to explode.
Yeah.
I still have doubt.
So, I mean, I've been the naysayer on the Iran thing, especially with the nukes. And the reason why I said that is because if somebody crosses the nuclear threshold, I mean, it is a bridge too far. I mean, you can't, because basically it would be a direct message that the USA say, hey, if any ally of Russia or China, I can just nuke them out of existence. And they can't nuke us back because that country doesn't have nukes. Well, I mean, how else can Russia and China respond to that with war? Because it's suicide to not respond to that. It's you can't not respond to that. So that's my main reason. As far as conventionally intervening, I don't know, because the 2003 style Iraq invasion, I've a long time been in the position that's not repeatable. The American population is very war fatigued, and I think people who say, "Oh, it's a conventional invasion," it's not a walk in the park. If you even look at Desert Storm or the 2003 invasion, you're talking about 500,000 troops, which the Army does not have. You would have to mobilize reservists. You'd have to call in National Guards. That's at least a couple 100,000 people in the USA being mobilized, just like Russians were mobilized in the fall of 2022. I mean, these wouldn't be. I mean, these would be. These wouldn't just be civilians. They'd be reservists actually under contract. I think for the most part, so it'd be a little different than what happened with Russia, but still, it would not be popular regardless of which president did it. And also, I think now there's more of an understanding. I think we're a little less arrogant than we were about the nature of warfare now than we were in 2003 when we still had that. That fever from Desert Storm, it was just so easy. We took out Saddam. It was incredibly easy. I think people are a little less arrogant about that. They would understand there'd be serious casualties. It wouldn't be a cakewalk like that. Now, as far as the actors, I mean, I know it's. I mean, I generally agree with Leo on the use of proxies, but I don't want to deny actors agency. I think every state is an actor on a stage. Ukraine is an actor. Israel is definitely an actor. There's their own agendas, and the tail can wag the dog, because if you let these lobbies into your inner sanctum, they're going to have their own agendas, and they're going to try to get the king's ear. Say, hey, you should do this. Hey, you should attack these guys for me. You know, it's not. So my point on that is that's not a one-sided relationship. They're going to exploit it however they can. I will say Trump, I don't think he's easy to manipulate. I don't think he's particularly well educated, or he's not even particularly smart, but he's not easy to manipulate. The problem is when someone does successfully manipulate him, it can be hard to unmanipulate. If someone convinces him to start digging, it's very hard to be that second person to, hey, stop digging. He's like, no, it's the right thing. You can't manipulate me. I'm going to keep digging. That's Trump's problem. So in his first term as president, he was manipulated by that Obama era bureaucracy, because he didn't fire anyone. He kept mostly the same bureaucracy as Obama had. So that was the liberal establishment that conservatives always complain about. And what did they do? They manipulated him. Of course they did. He ordered, I think the most egregious case was when he ordered a large-scale withdrawal from Syria, and the Pentagon admitted later they actually just ignored it. They just didn't do it, and they lied to him, and they said they were doing it when they didn't. So this time around, he's like, okay, I'm going to fire the liberal establishment. He sacked tons of people. And I know, like, even a lot of people aren't happy. Oh, you can't fire these people. Well, you know, it's a good thing. I mean, these were the guys who have been ruining the world for the past 20 years. I don't feel sorry for them. Problem is that he cleaned out. It was kind of a out of the pot into the fire type situation. He got the ear. He still has these neocons. He's got and that's really the problem with his second. It's like there's always something wrong with Trump. It's never like a perfect Trump. There's always something wrong with them. So this time around, he's got these neocons. He's got this Rubio crowd. I think that's a big driver for why he's not out of Ukraine, because I think it's, what is it, Rubio's daughter? I remember Rubio's daughter is somebody's daughter is in Ukraine actually right now, running one of those NGOs making profits. So he's not out of Ukraine, and they're sucking him back into the Middle East. I mean, it's really not the liberal. I mean, I can't wag my finger at the liberals, say it's you guys who's Obama era liberals. It's more the neocons this time, because he didn't fire those people because they're in his team, as he thinks, and they want basically the same thing, just with slightly different flavor.
So that's an interesting take. I mean, you're suggesting that, you know, Trump has a certain idea of what he wants to do, and he's being undermined by the people around him. But I've left.
I don't know if he has enough
point of view. Like, I don't agree with that. Like, I'm thinking what is going on, especially with Iran, is absolutely what Trump wants to go on, and he's totally on board with it. And he just did send out a few more things. Let me tell you what he just said. We know exactly where the so-called supreme leader is hiding. He is an easy target, but is safe there. We are not going to take him out, at least for now. But we don't want missiles shot at civilians or American soldiers. Our patience is wearing thin. Thank you for your attention on this matter. Unconditional surrender, he tweets after, or he puts on Telegram of it. So to me, again, it's more he's preparing everyone for the fact that very soon the United States is going to enter into the conflict in Iran. But Greg isn't so certain. So let's hear Greg's perspective.
Yeah, I think Ian makes a lot of good points, particularly about nuclear weapons. Plus, the only reason for nuclear weapons that we have is the pretext, which is only a pretext. Nobody really is. The reason for this is regime change. It's not because of the nuclear program. So, nuking Tehran doesn't seem plausible.
Well, what about so Trump is, he pretends, right? Because we know it's about regime change. Trump pretends it's about destroying Iran's nuclear weapons program. And again, everyone says that it's impervious to conventional weapons, and to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program, you have to use nuclear tipped bunker busting bombs. And so that's what I think is quite likely. I don't think they're going to use nukes in civilian centers, but it seems that they're preparing to use them against the nuclear, the nuclear areas that are built inside of mountains, and there's 5 of them, including Fordo, and 4 others. So I think, to me, I think that's where I would bet is going to happen. That's what will happen, and we will see these nuclear bunker busting bombs used against these hardened nuclear facilities. But
I mean, there's been an 80-year prohibition on doing that, which, like Ian said, would have a lot of really bad consequences to undo. And it's for a fake pretext, and that won't even necessarily regime change the country if you bomb those mountains, right?
Correct. It wouldn't bring regime change. It would allow him to claim victory. It would say, we won. They really want regime change, but they'll settle for a win, turning Iran into Libya and ending the threat of any possibility of creating a nuclear weapon. So they could declare victory for sure. I had another point that escaped me.
Well,
because we have such a. Go ahead, Carlo. Thank you.
There's an interesting connection between what Greg just said and what you just said when you mentioned Libya, because the general, I can't remember his name offhand, who claims to have gone into his superior's office and saw a paper on the desk of the 7 countries that were to be taken out.
Wesley
That
Clark.
includes Libya, Syria, Ethiopia, virtually the entire Middle East and a good portion of North Africa. And actually, Iran was the last country on that list to be taken out. And so that seems to register pretty well with what's going on. It was part of the of this global switch that was made popular in the 1980s by the right-wing think tanks. It's all going out of my head now. Yeah, and Wolfowitz's plan, right? So that this has been
for a new
kind of
American
carefully
century.
implemented over the decades, and it's been very successful so far. What this has to do, and without the use of nukes, it's been successful. So one might assume that you can't assume anything with Trump. You don't really know
Right.
whether he's in control of any of it at all. It seems now that he's been thoroughly manipulated. Though in a way, it's not fair to call it manipulation because he thinks he's doing well or whatever. I shouldn't assume what goes on in his mind. I mean, given the fact that he just had a parade on his birthday that no one went to. I mean, that's got to be tormenting him. So, but I think that can have bad consequences because you don't want to torment an ego like Trump's because you know what the result will be, and because I don't think he understands the consequences of using nuclear weapons. I don't think
that was the thought that escaped me was to focus on the consequences of using nuclear weapons. And
Right.
in past shows, I've alluded to the idea that the United States is trying to get away from the rules-based order, right? They feel too constrained by the rules-based order, and they want to get away from it. They want to create new paradigms, new, might makes right kind of paradigms. And in that way, and for that reason, I think that, they're not opposed to dropping some nukes and putting the world on notice that shit has changed, and it's America, baby. We're back, and we're not fucking around. I really think that is kind of the whole attitude. Like the old the old way is done, and we're doing things a new way, and we have to, because we're under these tremendous threats. So they want to sow chaos. They don't want China to be able to continue to trade in peace and prosperity, right? They want to disrupt that. They want to disrupt everything, because that's how they see that they will be successful in dealing with these threats. And so a whole new paradigm of chaos where shipping just blows up and nobody even knows where it came, why or who. This is the kind of thing, that the kind of world that they want to create. And so in that way, I think dropping a nuclear bomb on Iran's nuclear facilities and saying, hey, we'll do what we want to do and we don't care about the consequences. Now, I could be catastrophizing, but to me, it seems like that's within the realm of possibility. That's how they're thinking, and that's the kind of world paradigm that they would like to go towards. And dropping a nuclear weapon would further that aim. You know what I'm saying?
Well, the problem is that other people besides the USA have nukes. That worked in 1945, but other people have nukes now. That doesn't work anymore. I don't necessarily mean China and Russia are going to press the red button and nuke the USA, but they can. They would have to do something, and the most obvious response would be to give people nukes, to give Iran nukes, to give everybody nukes. It's something that it's a genie that can't be put back into the bottle. I think even the opposition factions, to include Marxists, have internalized this idea that the USA can do things without consequence. But there are consequences, and maybe it's time for some consequences, because I think because the reality is Americans can go outside without being scared that the school is going to get shot up, or that a bus is going to explode, and maybe it's just been too much time of being away from real danger to understand that you can't do stuff like that to people.
Yeah, speaking of black swans, I hope for a another kind of black swan. But anyway, go on.
I think Ian has really good, important logic there, that, the not even rules-based order, U.S. dominance depends on lack of proliferation, which we've only been able to keep from happening by not nuking non-nuclear countries. Right. So the first time we do, as Ian said, why wouldn't every country get a weapon, which ends U.S. impunity?
Yeah, and I mean, what are the chances that they will try and use nuclear weapons against these facilities, fail to destroy Iran's program, Iran develops a nuke, and then, isn't it really likely that they would use that against Israel, especially if the United States used nukes against them? So it's a very dangerous game. And so for that reason, I mean, I could be persuaded that it is high pressure tactics and it's a bluff. That's within the realm of possibility too.
Especially if we're talking about point target here, not an area target like a city. If there's we know there's these nuclear facilities in the mountains, well, then they would there's not a reason to cross the nuclear threshold. There was in 1945, because bombs were just not that powerful back then, but there's conventional weapons you can use. If they know where this facility is, then there's nothing stopping you from using conventional weapons. There's no payoff from using, even if, because if you wanted to make a point and destroy a city, then fine. that's actually more arguable than I think the way the Scott Ritter crowd. I mean, again, I'm not saying they're coming from a bad place, but I think they're kind of hedging their bets a little bit, saying, well, they wouldn't nuke a city, but they might, nuke the nuclear facility. Well, then, if it's a point, if it's not a city, if it's just one facility, then why use a nuke at all? There's other weapons.
Well, the argument would be because it's buried 1,000 kilometers underground, and that's the only thing that could penetrate that deep. But I don't know if that's true. I mean, there might be conventional weapons that could do it. And they talked about, dropping like what they did to get Nasrallah. They dropped a bomb. It created a crater. They dropped another bomb in that crater. It created a deeper crater. They dropped another bomb. And I want to say they dropped like 85 conventional weapons on Nasrallah's building.
But Iran has air defenses, so they can't just do that.
Well, part of what's happening right now, and I think this wasn't anticipated, is that Russia did give Russia gave Iran a lot of weapons that weren't publicized and weren't previously known. The Pantsir, which is good against drones and close air defense, they had those. So if you look at the news, I think that wasn't anticipated. And maybe part of the urgency is the understanding that once Ukraine has been resolved one way or another, the Ukraine question's been resolved one way or another, Russia can focus more on the Middle East because, there's just not a lot they can give the Middle East right now because they're so focused on Ukraine. But all those missiles being dropped on Ukraine right now, if there was no problem with Ukraine, they could be routed to the Middle East instead. So maybe there's this understanding that the clock's ticking, and after there's some sort of peace in Ukraine, those missiles could be sent to Iran. And I think that would actually solve the Middle Eastern question as well. If there was just such solid ballistic missiles and air defense, just what are you going to do at that point? And I think that's a big problem with this 5-day standoff or shooting match, not even a standoff, shooting match between Israel and Iran. Is the question of what are Iran's supplies, and is there anyone feeding them more supplies? Because with Israel, it's not a problem. If they run out, that's not, they don't lose. They just get more because they have all of NATO. They have, 30 something countries willing to send them more. But with Iran, we don't know what they're getting.
So it's a war of attrition at the moment, and we're like Ian said, only 5 days in. It's hard to know who is getting the upper hand. Personally, I think that Israel is being hit very hard, and they have a much lower pain tolerance, right? They have a much lower threshold for sacrificing and dealing with this kind of thing. They're a smaller country. Their economy is getting killed, and they can't last in this way for very much longer. And of course, I think Iran could suffer a whole lot more. And I think they have the capacity to continue these strikes because they have so many missiles, and they're just, eking out a few each day, but it's forcing all the Israelis into the bomb shelters, etc. The point is, the United States, I think, for this reason, is going to enter as soon as possible because they understand that a war of attrition benefits Iran. And so they need to, put their finger on the scale and definitely do their utmost to help Israel and to get Iran to capitulate or surrender, and declare victory somehow. And so I think that's what they're going to do. And I think that at the very least they're going to start bombing with conventional weapons. What do you guys think? Like they might not use nukes against these nuclear sites buried deep in the mountain, but they'll definitely use, I think, conventional weapons wherever they think are going to be most effective to winning and getting Iran to capitulate, or at least to decapitate the leadership and hope for regime change. And ultimately, like Trump said just a few minutes ago, we're not going to get the leader, but we can if we want to. Like, I think that's totally on the table. Again, that's like when they said, we're not going to give javelins. Like, we know how that
works. What weapons are they going to use against Iran, and which weapons would not incur American casualties?
Right.
Because yes, with strategic weapons, with missiles, you can fire them, and it doesn't matter if the missiles get shot down or not. But if you're talking about these F-16, F-18, and F-35 mounted weapons, where you have to get somewhat close to the target, well, they can be shot down. So what? So are people going to accept? Are Americans going, even Americans who like Trump, are they going to accept American pilots being killed in Iran? I don't think they are. I'm extremely skeptical that they are. I mean, especially since Israel has its own military, and Israeli pilots being killed is, frankly, to Americans not a big deal. It's a meme on Facebook. Oh, this poor Israeli pilots died. It's different from an American pilot being killed, even if that Israeli pilot had an American passport, which, from what I understand, about a third of their pilots do. It's a large number of them are dual American citizens, but it's still different. I think there's nothing to be gained by directly entering the war. They can just give weapons to Israel, and Israel risks its own skin to deploy those weapons. I think that's much more likely.
Plus the, promise from Iran, which people tend to believe, that they will attack all U.S. bases in the region and the oil production of the Gulf countries, and maybe close the Strait of Hormuz. So, that's a lot of costs for, like what Ian's saying, what is the gain? And I mean, the U.S. just failed to be able to deal with the Houthis, right?
So
And we're supposedly running very low on air defense missiles for ballistic missile defense.
We also have to recall.
Isn't that the biggest question? I mean, go ahead, Carlo.
No, I just want to say, none of us here, and Ian included, but to a lesser extent than me, for instance, can parse what weaponry is available and what the different levels of nuclear weapons are available to not only the U.S. side, but of course the other side, and also the U.S. is already, as far as, and I believe this when I listen to people who know far more about the weaponry itself and the way these things unfold by listening to them, because they've been on the inside. I don't say that being on the inside is necessarily a good thing, because I hear a lot of stuff by being permanently on the outside. I understand better than they do, oddly enough. I mean, at least I've had better predictive powers. But I will say that they claim that that the U.S. is already involved, deeply involved, and there was, I think it was Trump himself who talked about U.S. pilots, and he seemed to be saying that there wasn't going to be any boots on the ground, that it was one of these things that could be done once again by bombing alone, which we've known, at least the general layman has the impression, has not been successful, a successful tactic by the U.S. By the U.S. government, well, for a long time, and even actually boots on the ground. You can go back to Vietnam, that was not successful, and you can go back to the proxies, like the Contras, that was not successful. So the thing is, we really can't tell what they can bring to bear, what the U.S. and Israel can bring to bear on Iran, and that that kind of I like to stand back a little bit when I think about that, because it's not in my field of knowledge. So
maybe can I pose a question to the group? How about we game this out? What if the same fate as Syria befalls Iran? What happens? I mean, what happens with Russia? What happens with China? What happens? I mean, everyone has been saying that this. I mean, there's of course like great, strong, very strong arguments that Iran is of central importance to BRICS, to
Mhm.
the multipolar world. But how? I mean, what would exactly happen?
If what? If there was an attack, a direct attack against Iran, or
No.
maybe
If the same fate that
If regime change, if they're successful in their regime change, or they turn it into a failed state like Libya,
or Syria.
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be good for Russia and China. It would be a strategic defeat.
China's, yeah.
Yeah.
China
would,
gets 10% of their oil.
It would improve the
10% of their oil.
position of the West, in the geopolitical chess match that is, underway. But yeah, no, I can't get nice and specific. It would be cool to hear some specific, answers, at least even conjecture. But other than just saying, it would be a strategic defeat. I mean, Iran is a very important ally, because they give, like Greg just said, 10% of China's oil imports come from Iran. Like over 85% of their exports go to China. And that's important. And then just imagine if you have like Pakistan is a big ally of China. Imagine Pakistan being, encircled by India, a hostile government in Iran, and then who's their hostile government on their other side? It's I'd have to look at a map, but they wouldn't like it, because then they would be, they would be in a very bad position. They would be totally encircled. So it would be bad. It would be, I think, a lot worse than Syria.
Right.
And the north-south trade corridor that Russia is very much invested in.
my answer. Go ahead.
But also, I mean, given this setback, just imagining, right? If there is this major setback, how long would it last? Maybe are there other angles? Are there? I mean, just like with Syria, this situation cannot last. With this Giuliani asshole running the show, it's not sustainable.
No, so the problem for me is if that happens, if Iran gets destroyed, basically the United States will have hegemony in the Middle East, and the new paradigm will be against Israel and the U.S. and against Turkey and these these Wahhabist despotic regimes, the Gulf states and Turkey, and their head choppers. And those two aren't going to agree on everything. But once they're the only players, and the legitimate resistance of Hezbollah, the Palestinians, and Iran, once that's removed, it's just a shitty paradigm where you really do have, a dispute between two groups that, neither one of them are legitimate. Obviously, I would have to. I don't know. Would I be rooting for the head choppers over? But what kind of a tension would there even be? I think what we would see is the whole Trump initiative. What's his initiative called? Abraham Accords. So the Abraham Accords would be implemented, and there would be no resistance to that. And the United States and Israel would be the regional hegemon. Turkey would have some influence, but they're a bit farther away. And in that kind of a scenario, it's just bad for the people of the region, and it just would solidify imperial control of all those resources, all those governments, and those markets. And it would be a defeat for legitimate resistance. So, I mean, I hope not to see that.
Well, I think Leo's right when he almost automatically projects the situation going in Iran being related to the situation with Russia and China. I mean, that's obviously this hostility to Iran has been intensified by the fact that Iran is now part of BRICS. They're very close to China and Russia trade-wise. and I think that's what's led to the open, almost irrational hostility. I mean, you want to talk irrational? We can go back to the Megiddo and the last battle that what's his name, the congressman who mentioned earlier. He used to be in
Mike Huckabee.
Huckabee, right? He's now ambassador. Huckabee is wrapped up in. For them, that's for those kind of Christians, that's a delight because it conforms to all of these absolutely crazy beliefs that they have. And that all of these prophecies, as they selectively drawn them from the Bible, basically, have now come into fruition, and we're that close to the end of the world, where all the righteous people, after everyone has died, all of their bodies and souls will be raised up into heaven, and all of you people and myself will be dashed out into hell. There's a level at which there's actual genuine belief that is going to take place. So this can get pretty crazy.
If they're right, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be up there with them and not here with you guys.
Oh, yeah. I've noticed that. You and Joseph Stalin.
Right. So let's see. Ian dropped out for a sec. Hopefully he'll be right back. I did want to talk about China. I mean, I like how we dealt with the whole question of what's going to happen. And the biggest question is, is the U.S. going to start bombing Iran? If they do, will it be successful? How will Iran respond to that? Will Iran start attacking, U.S. bases and oil infrastructure? And if that happens, that's huge, right? That's World War III kind of stuff. That's global economic collapse, right?
Sorry, I
wanted
cut out for a minute there. But
yeah, I mean, following Leo's gaming this out, that tells us that Russia and China are very unlikely to allow this to happen. Right.
And as it could be a segue point, China's condemnation of Israel and official statement of support for Iran. How in diplomatic history, how significant is that? How much of a uncharacteristic move is that? I mean, has China actually come out to explicitly support Syria before? No. Anyone directly in a conflict, in the context of a ongoing conflict? I don't think so. So that's probably pretty significant.
And the closest I can think of is when Trump was threatening North Korea, and China said they would defend them.
Right.
So I want to answer the question on what would the collapse of Iran mean. I would say it was. I don't disagree with the other opinions here, but I think for the Middle East specifically, it would set the Middle East back by 500 years. And I'm not exaggerating. There were 500 years, like literally five. It would set them back by 500 years. The reason why is because Iran is the only nation the exception besides Turkey, the only modern nation state in the Middle East, including Israel, because Israel is not a real nation state. It's like it's a tribe. There's one tribe that says we are superior to everyone else. Everyone else is Untermenschen. We're the master race. So Israel is, they parade themselves as
it's a colony too.
Right. Yeah. But Iran is one of the world's it's not just a nation state, it's one of the world's oldest nation states. They had a nation state when Europeans were still Saxons and Franks and all these guys putting war paint on and fighting the tribe next door. So I don't think it's likely that the USA or any Western power is going to break the Iranian state. Because, I do love Arabs. I've been to the Middle East several times, not even just is it for bad reasons, just to visit them. But their states are still family affairs. You take out, it's one man or one family. You take out the Husseins, Iraq collapses. You take out the Assads, Syria collapses. You take down the Gaddafi family. Libya collapses. That's the unfortunate thing. They still think in terms of family and personal, bloodlines. They still think about that. There's that joke, this is like, why do you hate this guy across, down the river from you? Well, he stole our camels, 200 years ago. We're still pissed off at him. But, the Iranians still think in terms of nation states. So like even when Saddam invaded, he thought, well, their government collapsed, their military collapse will just be a cakewalk. Well, no, because even people who didn't necessarily like the Islamic Revolution still said, well, we're being attacked by a foreign invader. So they all came together. So these just ad hoc militias of villages coming together. They had no training, no military. They still came together and pushed back the invaders, because Iran is, in every sense of the word, a nation state. And I think even most Western people say, oh, well, it's just this, blah, blah, blah. It's a dictatorship, blah, blah, blah. Well, it's not true. So I don't think...
Right.
So it would be a disaster if Iran collapsed. I don't think it's likely, especially because, one, I think the USA's ability to do conventional warfare has degraded since 2003, and also because the technology gap between the so-called first world and so-called third world, which are outdated terms in of themselves, but the gap has narrowed. I just don't see it happening.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they're going to successfully regime change or destroy the government of Iran. I think they've been preparing for this for a long time. And even if a war of attrition, including the EU and the United States, is being waged against Iran, I think they can hold out and they can, survive. But they might do it by collapsing the global economy and by blocking the Strait of Hormuz, by destroying U.S. bases in the region and destroying the oil infrastructure of the Gulf states, which you got to wonder, like, is that something that Trump is okay with doing? Because that's the question. Like, if he attacks Iran, he must be okay with that happening. Right. And it's hard to imagine that Trump is okay with oil prices skyrocketing and, the global economy collapsing, probably the stock market taking a big hit. Like, is he okay with that?
Oh,
and risking Iran nuking Israel? Like, that's a risk. Like, if you go after Iran and try and destroy them and maybe use nuclear weapons against their nuclear facilities, like, that's what does Iran have to lose by retaliating as much as they can? And so if you're going to try and, get Iran to do that, like, I'm not sure they want to, but if we see them attack Iran, which seems like they're going to do, clearly they're okay with all of the above, or they're willing to risk all of the above happening. And that just shows you the gravity of the paradigm change that's taking place in our world. And you got to appreciate that.
Like the Iranian official said, what happens to those riots once gas prices hit $200 a gallon?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I remember too when right after October 7th, the U.S. sent a huge amount of military hardware out there just to keep, intimidate everybody. This could be similar too. There's already reports that there's been at least 3 big Chinese cargo jets bringing in supplies to Iran. So it could be intended to, curtail that as much as possible too.
What's interesting is that when it comes to oil supply being cut off due to a regional conflict, due to the Strait of Hormuz, what's interesting is that most of the global powers will be okay. So the USA is domestic oil production, also has Canada, China has Russia, And of course, Russia is okay. The people who are not okay is Europe, the European Union, and the UK. So it's kind of interesting to consider that aspect because the USA does consider Europe a competitor and has been very successful in whittling down and isolating Europe. And what's really interesting about that is that when I talk to Europeans, they're oblivious to this because, I'll point out things like in the early 2000s, the combined GDP of the European Union is almost equal to the USA. Now it's half the USA. And now it's doing even worse now that they've been isolated from Russia, which was their main source of criminally cheap energy. And so if they get isolated also from, I don't even know what Europe would do if the Middle East just got embroiled in war and there wasn't really much.
Well,
oil
I'll tell you
coming
what,
from
they
there.
would have to buy very expensive United States exports, and they still suffer.
Well,
but
there's
that
not
would
enough.
make the United States very happy. And yeah, I don't put it past
I
the
mean,
United States.
this will drive the shortage will drive prices high for everybody, very high.
Yeah, but
For
the
sure.
crucial thing about Europe is they don't have a pipeline because USA has this domestic supply and Canada. There's that pipelines from Kazakhstan, Russia to Kazakhstan, so China will be okay. There's no pipelines. There's not really, it's surprising. There's a surprising lack of pipelines out of the Middle East directly to customers. So,
Yeah,
But there is an
it's
open
even-
market, right? I mean, a futures market, so Europe can, compete and drive the price up and get it high enough that they can get what they want to buy. In
Because
theory,
I've flown, there was a time, this was when was this? This was 2016. I actually flew by helicopter over the Persian Gulf, and it was actually, no photo or video can really do it justice. It's just like it's just this full of tankers. It's just like as far as hundreds, any direction you look, there's at any given moment, there was hundreds of tankers in all directions. So just all of that trickled to a stop.
Yeah. Interestingly,
It'd be
this
disaster.
morning, there was a collision between two tankers in the Gulf of Hormuz. We're not sure what to make of that. Maybe it's a warning from Iran that Iran can mess with the navigational systems of the
They
tankers.
jammed the GPS. That is true. It's
But
confirmed.
apparently there was
Yeah, I
a
read that.
collision in the Straits. And yeah, like I said, that could be a threat, like, a signal. Hey, this is possible. We can stop this, energy traffic through here if we want to. So don't fuck with us. I'm going to try and do a very hard and awkward pivot to China. And I wanted to talk about China a little bit. There's a lot of different perceptions and ways of understanding what China is and, why they're a threat to the West, at least why the West claims that they're a threat to them. In 1949, they were one of the poorest countries in the world. And, that's when the communists took over China in 1949. And Greg, I know you had a little bit of a timeline that kind of shows the kinds of economic systems that they have been, utilizing since their, since the Communist Party took over in 1949. Do you want to put that up? Or I can put that up probably, right?
yeah,
I can put that up.
you can put it up.
Present. Let's see. Oh, here, add to stage. Okay. So you titled this China's Dialectical Governance Phases. So when they first took over, they did a land reform. Of course, they had a good relationship with the Soviet Union and Joseph Stalin. Mixed economy, alliance with national patriotic bourgeoisie, state control of commanding heights, banking, heavy industry, foreign trade. And then from 52 to 56, perceived capitalist backsliding, Korean War mobilization, Soviet aid and influence. So they collectivized agriculture. They instituted the first 5-year plan, nationalized industry, and introduction of socialist social contract. And then we
This
had
should
Stalin.
also Sorry, U.S. sanctions began in 1951 in response to the Korean War. It should be in there. So go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's important. And then ultra left turn. So Khrushchev came to power. He shot all over Stalin. That and Stalin's legacy, and that resulted in the Sino-Soviet split. We had the ultra left turn reaction to Khrushchev denunciation of Stalin, and market influenced revisionism and bureaucratization, which included the Great Leap Forward and then the Cultural Revolution, some political purges. So that went on from 56 to 76. Then we had Deng put in some reforms from 78 to 2012, which included market liberalization, destruction of social safety net and iron rice bowl, special economic zones, technology transfer agreements, socialism with Chinese characteristics. And then in 2012, Xi became the leader of China.
Sorry.
In response to inequality and Western influence, he re-emphasis on Marxist education, ideological tightening, anti-corruption campaign, tech sector regulation, CPC members on corporate boards, common prosperity initiative. So I like that. That is the first time I really went through that closely. I was driving when I first looked at it. So what you have any additional commentary to add to that, Greg?
Well, let's see where the conversation goes.
Okay,
I could go into a long
Leo,
spiel,
I
but
definitely
it's like
have thoughts, but I'm liable just to start talking and not shutting up, and so I don't want to do that. Did you have some immediate thoughts on what Greg presented here? You're muted, Leo.
Yeah, thanks for putting that together, Greg, in such a succinct, short, clear fashion. This demonstrates very clearly the continuity, the consistency, the absolute dedication to Marxism, Leninism that China has embarked on since 1949. I mean, this hammer has swung, from one end to the other, and always correcting the path. When the euphoria of revolution goes a little bit too overboard, the CPC corrects path to a more anyway, in every step of the way, the CPC has corrected path. And so we see a great continuity, a continuity which mirrors the colonial capitalist sphere, right? There has been nothing but continuity. Liberalism has shape-shifted, but it continues the same proto-fascist, rule of minority, and China's path, the hammer swinging from one side to the other, is really clearly shown by this timeline.
So go ahead, Greg. Go ahead.
There's a lot of kind of angles you can look at it through. One very clear driver of these pivots is the level of siege, starting with the U.S. sanctions in 51, and then worsening with the Sino-Soviet split. You see more of a left siege, kind of autarkic reaction. And then after the detente with the U.S., there's a swing to liberalize, and political liberalization, economic liberalization, and U.S. pivot to Asia is coincidental with the shift back left and tightening politically and move back towards more autarkic type economics.
Yeah, maybe we can. Okay, Billy, go on.
No, I mean that's it. So me and Greg have a little disagreement over Marxism, and so Greg Greg is someone who perceives what China did to be, he's supportive of China's reforms, but he does say that it was it was a move away from socialism, right? So in Greg's understanding, what China did was a move away from socialism, and I argue with him. And my basic point is that like Deng asked, well, what is socialism? I mean, if we're going to define socialism just as the abolition of private ownership of the means of production, yes, they moved away from that. But I would argue that socialism is more. Socialism is the effort and it's the effort and the pursuit of a global socialist system. And to do that, you have to destroy the global capitalist system. So in my thinking, what socialism actually is, what Marxism actually is, it's the struggle against the unipolar capitalist system and the effort to replace that with a global socialist system. And so in that way, any tactic, any strategy that is successful in displacing capitalist, hegemony is the most Marxist thing you can do. It's the most socialist thing you can do. So we just have a different kind of perception about what socialism is, what Marxism is, and different tactics. Or is it a non-socialist tactic, or is it a socialist tactic? I would argue that the reforms, the liberal reforms, allowing China to have access to Western markets, Western investment, Western technology, those were Marxist reforms. That was the Marxist thing to do, because ultimately it's what's successful in creating a global socialist system, and it's displacing the global capitalist system. So I would argue that's the Marxist thing to do, and then Greg would argue that it was a shift away from Marxism. So
you're both right.
Well,
sure.
Let me jump in.
I like that.
I mean,
no, I'm Greg. I apologize. I definitely did just speak for you, so don't let me do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the definition of Marx is socialism is abolishing private ownership of the means of production. I mean, I think this is part of a socialist project still, and Soviet Union did this, China's done it, and twice arguably they've had some degree of capitalism present. Yeah, I mean, I say it's a rightward move on a socialist development path with risks and benefits. And
okay, can I jump in? Yes, there are at least two things to say about that. One, the original Marx, the word that Marx used was not abolition. The word Marx used, the German word, is Aufhebung. Aufhebung is a Hegelian concept. This incidentally, I just from social media from Yen Lee. It's a Vietnamese Marxist. She just was saying this. Aufhebung is a Hegelian concept that means to negate, but also to preserve and elevate all at once. So it's not destruction, but transformation. When the communists speak of Aufhebung of the bourgeois family, for example, or the present state of things, which includes capitalism and the private ownership of profit-generating property, it's about going beyond it. It's about carrying forward what is progressive in these things, in these liberal capitalist developments, like individuality, like science and productivity. I mean, that's a little bit complicated there, but anyway, preserving what is the progressive elements of these things while overcoming what is alienating, overcoming, for example, the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie in political terms. So I think this is useful, and that's number one. And then number two, this is why we have Lenin, right? Marx died in 1870s or something like 1880s, and he did not live long enough to see the world, to see imperialism develop into such a high level, to such a level of strength, global domination. And so this is why we have Lenin. Lenin theorized socialism as the path towards communism, towards the total abolition, actual abolition of class, of ownership of profit-generating property, of money, of the state. Right? We have a stateless Star Trek world. So socialism is the path towards that, and on this path, we have the dictator. We have capitalism, right? We use the bourgeoisie towards our goals. That's why one of the stars on the Chinese flag of the 4 small stars, which follow the big star that represents the CPC, is the national bourgeoisie. Right? We need the national bourgeoisie as well in this phase of historical development of humanity, of global society, right? Of economic organization. So under socialism, capitalism does exist, but it is subsumed, it is controlled, it is absolutely controlled by a majoritarian working class state that represents the interests of the majority of the working class. It's not a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, of the ownership class, of the minority of super rich ownership class, like in the West. So this is Lenin's conception of socialism, and this is the conception that all of the global South socialist countries have adopted.
I mean, let me refine what you're saying a little bit. So I've been reading about the NEP and its evolution and the Soviet system. I mean, Lenin was pretty clear as he saw it as a temporary retreat, and Stalin viewed it as similar, and then became worried about it because he thought the capitalists were reasserting themselves in various ways, the kulaks in particular, and then the capitalists he thought were starting to corrupt the government and society and the party. So Mao similarly thought it called Kant's, I think, capitalism a cancer starting in like 1952 or 53. And so that's when he started moving to socialize. And then after Khrushchev's secret speech, one of Mao's response was the 100 Flowers campaign, which was a big open up to intellectuals in particular to start criticizing the party and what was happening. And apparently Mao was shocked at how much organized liberal resistance emerged. And that caused him to go a long anti-rightist campaign and then into the ultra left stuff we talked about, which, also in relation to the Soviet Union. But so, if that's the tension, is if you have them, they start corroding the system.
Absolutely. And to steer a revolutionary state, right, after a socialist revolution, is to navigate contradictions. So there are all of these contradictions that are constant. They are, have not been resolved, and they will not be resolved until, of course, the fundamental contradiction of ownership of profit generating property is abolished. So we have all of these contradictions, and of course, what Mao says, what Lenin says, can be contradictory from time to time, because we are constantly, have to deal with these contradictions. And so, at one point, they may say something in one way, or at another time they may say something in the other way. It's a part of it's a feature of the socialist path, not a bug. Right. And I just want to say, with this in mind, we need to be dialectical. We need to constantly watch ourselves and be dialectical, and constantly look at, for example, the tremendous cost. I mean, is the meme like what is the cost, or at what cost? But actually, right, the actual tremendous, like, epic cost to the Chinese people that reform and opening up has caused, has exacted upon the Chinese working class. I mean, the suffering was real, right? Introducing limited capitalism, even under the thumb of the socialist state, it was horrendous. The 90s. I mean, watch Chinese movies. The alienation, the loneliness, the dog eat dog, fight for survival on the streets with this new class of bourgeoisie that brutally exploits the people, and also allowing Western corporations to brutally exploit the people. I mean, those suicide nets were real for 5 years, right? But they were real. Like, people were committing suicide because it was so fucking horrendous. But, all of this, right? The cost, if it's worth it, Chinese people themselves, right, who have lived through this, sometimes will say that the cost is not worth it. I have met people like this. I have met working class people. I've met Chinese Marxists, right? I've met Chinese communists who absolutely say the cost was not worth it. I met this one. Well, anyway, I'm not going to go into the personal anecdotes of what people I met said, but basically, the horror of capitalism in the 1990s was very, very real. But, Chinese people who live in China, who come from China, right? Their perspective, of course, is like valid and super important to take into consideration. But this is the mistake or the shortcoming that a lot of communists have from the GDR before the reunification or the cannibalism of 1991 to the Soviet Union, right, is the underestimation of the absolute fucking evil of imperialism and the strength of imperialism. I mean, these Chinese people that I have met, they actually truly underestimate what would happen to the Chinese people if it was not strong today in 2025, if there is no economic strength, technological superiority, military absolute fucking dominance of the People's Republic of China. What would happen? What would happen is Libya. What would happen is what happened to all of these countries that had succumbed, that had been defeated by imperialism. Well, it would be civil war in China. It would be millions of deaths. It would be absolute, like, as much as the 90s was, in many ways horrifying. I mean, it would be 1,000 times. It would be 100,000 times as horrible. In 1920s, in 1930s, Sun Yat-sen, the Chinese nationalist intellectual, said the fate of the Chinese people will be like that of the Native Americans, right? That, like, basically the Chinese people, the Han race and the ethnic minorities will go extinct. I mean, that was his prediction. Things were headed that way until the series of events that led us out of that fate. But it's ever present, this danger, the danger of imperialism. If China is not strong today, China would face another 1,000 years of humiliation, like we cannot even imagine.
No, absolutely. And I haven't had an opportunity to kind of give my 2 cents. I like to push back on a couple of conventional narratives that I think are widely, embraced, but I think are kind of wrong. And then I have just an overall perception of what China has accomplished and how we should perceive, China's history. So, I mean, of course, in the West, there's all kinds of lies meant to undermine China, demonize socialism, demonize China's leaders. But what I like to point to is that there's, not really a big conflict between Mao and Deng, right? So I do like to talk about what Leo mentioned at the beginning was the continuity. And so, not dismissing, the list of economic changes that Greg, demonstrated in, in the first, the bullet points that we looked at. I would just say that, changes are driven by the material conditions. And so if you understand the material conditions that were going on and what was driving the changes in the economy. So it's always, environmental things that are causing the change. But, Mao knew very well in, 1945, and he said capitalism is what, we're going to need to develop productive forces as rapidly as possible. And so Mao was always wanting to open up with the West. And so there's this continuity, but there was material conditions that were keeping Mao from doing that. And those material conditions were namely the Western economic embargo caused by Korean War. And then there was also the Sino-Soviet split. So he was forced into a policy of self-sufficiency. And when you're forced into a policy of self-sufficiency and you have to focus on building your military and heavy industry, it's going to result in certain economic policies that will facilitate those aims and those that you're kind of constrained by the material conditions that exist. But at the same time, he was always lobbying the West to end their embargo. And so from it was at least 15 years of meetings, ambassadorial level meetings in Geneva, Switzerland, where China was constantly bringing up with the US, hey, you guys can end this embargo. We're not a threat. You don't need to hate us. Just end this embargo and let us trade. And so that finally bore fruit in 1971, and that changed the material conditions. And then, of course, Mao actually began the opening up process in 1971. And you saw reforms starting to take shape, which, of course, got further underway with Deng. And then in 1978, you had things. But that even in 1978, stuff really didn't start happening. Stuff really didn't start happening until China was able to join the World Trade Organization in 2000. And then you could even argue it wasn't even until 2007 that the change really started happening. So it's a long process, but ideologically speaking, I think everybody was on the same page that it's going to be better for China if we are able to, harness capitalist mode of production, harness Western investment, and that's going to give us the strength and the not just the strength to resist, any attacks from the imperialists, but it's also going to most efficiently raise standards of living, benefit people's lives, and pull people out of poverty. And so, but I call that socialism. I call that, Marxism with Chinese characteristics. And so I would disagree with people who want to say, oh, that's capitalism. It's capitalism that made, China, prosperous. So that's kind of why I take the view, and I reject the other view that it was a retreat from socialism. I mean, it's a retreat from socialism insofar as we narrowly define socialism as a mode of production. But I think socialism is more than just a mode of production. Go ahead.
The social contract was destroyed, as Leo was saying, with pretty bad consequences.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would argue about the bad consequences. I mean, I look at China now. I look at their prosperity, and I would say the social
wealth inequality exploded, right? I mean, wealth inequality. There was no health care. There was no health care.
One at a time. Let's do one at a time, Greg.
Yeah.
So, so your first objection. So we're having a disagreement. I'm saying that
we're saying we're not having a disagreement. We're saying that
the social contract had good
there's a progress, and each stage has negative effects that the next stage has to deal with. So,
okay, well, ending the social contract, I would argue, had good outcomes. right? Because people's prosperity increased. Now, and your counter argument to that was no, wealth inequality increased. But I want to point out that wealth
both.
inequality was driven by different provinces. It's an inevitable and natural result of development. If you can't have across the board development, that's impossible. You have to focus your development and target. You have to actually build things in a particular place. That particular place is going to be more prosperous than the place that you didn't build in. There is no way that you can. I mean, so I think there's something wrong with that criticism. That it is not a criticism that's rational. You can't criticize them. Well, inequality, right? I mean, well, there's inequality is inescapable when you're developing. So that's not a legitimate criticism. It would be a legitimate criticism if people in the rural areas weren't also seeing their quality of life and their prosperity increase. But of course, they were at a very quick level. And right now, prosperity is increasing for rural people faster than it is increasing for urban people. So
that has been true since the 80s. Yeah, but yeah.
Say that again.
Rural people, that has been true since long before as well.
So again, I just kind of I don't know. I reject the perception that that you're embracing that it's a move away from socialism and there was negative consequences to these decisions.
Let me break it down to more. There's right and left that have the meaning. Left is more egalitarian. Right is more hierarchies. Right. During Mao, there was a
hierarchies based on ownership.
Well, and other privileges, and power, potentially.
Yeah. But let's not say all hierarchy, because every indigenous society had leaders, and they were not based on ownership. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, one of the things I read is that it was hard to get, if you were a farmer, to make more money during Mao's time. There was payment and work points, I believe, then of currency in the rural areas. So there was, like Leo said, the agricultural areas and rural areas grew a lot once they started having the ability to grow their own crops and make money from it. That was energizing. I lost my train of thought. Oh, so
yeah.
Go ahead.
My general point is I see continuity, and I see the changes that people point to and try and interject ideological differences and blaming these ideological differences for the changes that we saw take place. I argue the changes that we saw take place with China's economy was due to material conditions and the needs of the nation, and not so much. I think that there's ideological continuity from Mao through Deng through Xi, and I think that ideology is Marxism. It's socialism, and I think the changes that we've seen weren't driven by ideological differences or ideological disputes, but they were driven by sometimes internal political rivalries. No doubt there was internal political rivalries, but predominantly for material conditions and outside threats and outside factors that forced them into first an economy of self-sufficiency, and then after dealing with that and talking the West into ending their embargo, you saw an opening up process begin. And you see today what I've shared that Mao quote with you and from 1945, and today's China looks very much like what Mao was opining for in 1945. And so I just kind of reject all the people that say, well, Deng was a capitalist and Mao was the true socialist. And now China's capitalist and they're no longer socialist. Like, that's the kind of thing I reject. And I also want to reject, and I think so in a way, Greg, your argument a little bit supports that way of thinking. And that's kind of why I reject it, because you kind of concede it. Well, it was a move away from socialism. And I don't know. I think that's true with a very narrow definition of socialism, and I kind of reject that narrow definition of socialism, and I want to put forth a larger definition of socialism, which is, to replace the global capitalist system with a global socialist system. That effort is the effort of socialism, and any tactic, any strategy, even one that embraces capitalist markets and the capitalist mode of production, is the socialist thing to do if it furthers the socialist interest. So your counter argument is that's not really what Marx said, and I
don't have a counter argument. I mean, I don't think this is not socialism. I'm not arguing that.
Okay, well, I apologize.
Yeah, I think you're both right.
Yeah, I mean, I called it dialectical phases because I think it is an attempt to get to socialism and navigate both internal and external contradictions back and forth, because there is no one simple path.
Yeah, let's just say, but we can all agree that Xi Jinping is doing a great fucking job.
Yes, I can agree to that.
The Gini coefficient has been going down in China since he took power in 2013. Anyone can go look at the Gini coefficient.
Yeah. No, they recognize that was a problem because, like you guys alluded to, the inequality, and that was definitely a thing. But it's a thing that's inescapable, right? You can't develop, especially so rapidly, across the board everywhere equally. And suggesting that they should do that or could have done that is just preposterous. Sure. Development has to take place in certain areas, and that's the areas that are going to benefit the most. So you have regional inequalities. They're driven by regional inequalities and high costs of living in certain regions. And so, there's a low cost of living in the rural areas, of course, and then a super high cost of living in Beijing and in the big cities.
Yeah. And uneven development was identified as a major problem of reform and opening up since the very beginning.
And so their shared prosperity initiative includes developments and infrastructure, investment in rural areas to exactly address the inequalities. So,
Absolutely.
They've identified it as a problem and they're working on it, and they're successfully working on it. Just like if Iran collapses, China will successfully deal with that setback. It won't be the end of the world. It'll be a definite setback. It'll be an obstacle that China's going to have to overcome. But the thing is, you just have to appreciate what China has been able to accomplish and the things that they've set in motion to understand that there is no way in hell the West can contain China or, weaken China or destroy their economy. Like China is literally unstoppable. They are the future. And it sounds like I'm making a tenet of faith. But if I don't know. I would recommend. I don't. One post I had years ago was 5 articles from Godfrey Roberts just explaining what China has accomplished and how rapidly they have set things in motion and their development. And it's going to blossom. It's going to bloom. It's like you got the stem and then it's coming, and there's no stopping that. It's a force that is uncontainable, literally, and it's going to be really good for the world and for the United States to invest so much effort and propaganda and death and destruction into this futile effort to try and stop that from happening, because it's going to mess up the wealth, power, and privilege of wealthy Western elites. It's so awful. But that's the paradigm that is going on right now, and nothing is more nothing has more relevance to that than what we're seeing right now with Iran. It started off in Ukraine and then it went to Iran. And Ian, sorry to bring you into this conversation, but I'm pretty sure it's gonna, they're gonna turn their target on China, and we're gonna start seeing stuff in China once we get and maybe not. Maybe they're gonna fail in Iran and they're not even gonna try.
We'll see.
They're trying to put. Go ahead.
Yeah, a surgeon just performed surgery in Egypt and the patient was in Beijing. I mean, this is a level of connectivity.
Was it the other way around? Was the patient in Egypt?
No.
Okay.
The Chinese doctor was in Egypt for some reason. For reasons I don't know. But the patient was in Beijing, and the Chinese doctor.
I didn't know Egypt was so technologically advanced.
Well, I mean, this hospital. I mean, maybe I don't know what the particular circumstances are, but it was a Chinese doctor and it's Chinese technology. I mean, there's a super computing installation that China is building with a series of satellites. A supercomputing constellation, quantum computing constellation that will be orbiting Earth. I mean, that things like the thorium. I mean, we don't need to go on. Anyone interested can look at the just mind-boggling, like incomprehensible things that are happening right now technologically in China. But anyway, I just want to say, like, what a socialist country's system will always have a lot of points of criticism that people can criticize. There would always, it's not perfect. They're navigating contradictions, and domestically, socialist people, that's the wave of counter revolutions that were successful, right? The wave of color revolutions that were successful in Eastern Europe, including that of the Soviet Union, were partly, in important part, I would say, due to this short-sightedness of the socialists themselves and the naivete of the communists that lived in the Eastern Bloc, who criticized their own government because they live there. Yeah, they live in this country, and there were corruptions, there was injustice, there was all kinds of things, but they always failed to see how devastating the turn to so-called democracy would be, to economic liberalization, the shock therapy of neoliberal. I mean, what Russia experienced in the 90s. The Eastern Germans, I live in Germany, in the former East. The Eastern German socialists, just like the Tiananmen Square protesters, right, were calling for reform. They were calling for more socialist reforms, and maybe some, opening up. Maybe they wanted blue jeans, and they wanted more bananas, whatever. Yeah. But they did not call for a destruction of the system. But in their push for reform, they failed to realize how what a catastrophe, generational, absolute fucking catastrophe it would be if their calls for reform went too far, or was hijacked, was instrumentalized by the West. I mean, none of them foresaw what happened. I mean, some of them, of course, not the socialists, but some of the GDR people who, were passionate reformers and that wanted a Western-style democracy. Their illusions were immediately shattered by 1992. When the commission of I forget what the name of the organization was called, to redistribute the East German states' assets to private entities, selling everything off. I mean, this was a disaster. What the East Germans went through is similar to what Russians went through in the 90s. I mean, yeah, the same. It's the same. It's absolute devastation. So on the part of Chinese socialists, I mean, not as bad. Okay, not as bad as Russia. I see Ian.
Yes.
Okay, not as bad, but there were. It was absolutely also terrible.
Yeah. So Andrei Volchik wrote a great article. We sold our soul for plastic bags. He was in Romania or Hungary as a kid, and he talks about how he was, swept away with the propaganda and the pro-West, the music, And hey, this is what we want too. We want to live like that. And then it was a status symbol, to have these shopping bags made out of plastic, and it was so cool. But he didn't appreciate what they actually had, and everybody kind of bought into this liberal lie, and it was a propaganda coup, Hollywood fantasy siren song, as Tim Robbins calls it, just to say, hey, look, we can have peace and mutual prosperity and liberalness and consumerism, and you'll be just like us. That was the lie that was sold. And then, of course, the intent behind that lie was to conquer and dominate and exploit. And so, for instance, in Poland, the Catholic Church had all of the lands returned to it, and now the Catholic Church is the number one landowner in Poland. And the Soviets, of course, had what's that word? Expropriated all of the lands and did land reform with the Catholic Church's land holdings, and they got it all. The Catholic Church got it all back. They thanked Pope John Paul for his services, his anti-communist services, by giving the Catholics back all their land that the Soviets had expropriated. But it was very bad in Russia. Obviously, Poland was meant to be the showcase, right? So the West heavily invested. Jeffrey Sachs tells this story that the West heavily invested in Poland, and he lobbied that we do the same for Russia, that we give Russia the same economic support. But he says he was dismayed to realize that wasn't what they were going to do, that they saw Poland as they were going to treat Poland like the showcase and give them all the Marshall Plan aid, whereas Russia was going to continue to be the enemy, and we were going to work to break Russia apart and steal their resources. And so that's why we're not going to, undercut them with all these loans, these billions of dollars in loans, etc. But it was really bad for Russia, and Putin has done a tremendous job, and that's why he's so popular, because he's really increased the living standards of the Russian people. What is this? John Paul II was number 2. Okay, I stand corrected, I'm sure. But we know who I'm talking about, that guy with the fancy red shoes.
Well, with the Poles, Poland has always been very good. Well, maybe not always, but 1993 onwards, they were very good about advocating for themselves. If you look at the net takers and the net contributors to the European Union, you'll see that Poland got a huge amount of aid. And actually, that was the same after World War II also. Poland's got a huge amount of aid to rebuild. And in the 1990s, they also got a huge amount of money it was mostly German and French money that they used to rebuild. As far as Russia, yes, I think there was this hope that they would be a partner, that they would be an ally of Western countries, of the USA and the European Union, of Germany. Of course, that wasn't the case.
Yeah, it was a lie that was, Gorbachev believed and Yeltsin bought into, at least to a point. But by that time, by the time Yeltsin was there, Russia was too weak to, do anything about it. So you guys are very polite and listen to me ramble, and I feel like I was talking a lot about China and my perspective. Do you guys have more thoughts on the China thing, or even areas of disagreement?
Well, I just on a personal note, when I was growing up, after my reactionary parents brought me to the United States, when I was a teenager, I was embarrassed of being from China, being from such a poor country, such a poor, underdeveloped country. I literally had only found out what a telephone was a few years before moving to the U.S. And I have to say, now I'm so proud of my people. So proud that it is literally the hope of humanity, objectively speaking. But I also want to say that this same fate, that China is the path that China is on. what China is like today, what China is doing today, all of this could be India. It could be Japan. I mean, the Marxists in Japan in the 1920s and 30s were considerable, were pretty strong in the 19th and 20s and 30s. That were anti-fascist, that was anti-colonial, that was anti-capitalist. And they could have won. I mean, if things happened in a different way, Japan could have had a successful socialist revolution and avoided World War II. I just want to make the point that it's not anything to do with Chinese people. It's not, well, it is, of course. It has to do with the civilization, with centuries and millennia old ideas of actually egalitarianism, of actually various kinds of democracy, of very kinds of statehood, right? Of statecraft that is very useful, that is becoming very useful today. Of course, it has everything to do with the Chinese people, but I just want to emphasize that the same fate, India could be like China today. And China, if the gamble of the Long March had not paid off, it was a gamble. Mao Zedong absolutely did not know that it would succeed. The Kuomintang could have won, in which case the national bourgeoisie would be in power and would be collaborating with the US, with the UK, with all of the imperialist countries. And China would be like India today. And China would be like any sad and horrific, unjust place, backwards, and all of the feudal ideas come back, all of the reactionary things come back. So anyway, I just want to say,
beautiful small-footed women with, they're still probably doing foot binding if the bourgeoisie.
Yeah. So it's a class war. It's constant, ceaseless, relentless class war, and victory is never certain. And we have to stay vigilant and always do what we can to further to support the side of egalitarianism and justice.
It's a good point that China definitely represents the superiority of socialism and what is possible when the government is genuinely interested in identifying, using the Marxist dialectic, the Marxist lens to identify what policies will best improve the people's lives, right? And, Western democracies don't think on those terms. Can you fucking imagine? They don't think like that. They think, how can we divide the working class, keep them, fractured, keep them from coming together against us, and yet make sure that they're not revolutionary? How do we exploit them to the fullest extent without causing them to rebel and benefit ourselves and our ownership class? That is the approach to governance of the West. And what China is proof that if you have a government that thinks about all the people, what they are capable of, from the poorest country to the wealthiest, from the most backwards to the most advanced in 75 years, it's amazing and it's unstoppable. But India could have done it, but India had this very bad influence of the British parliamentary system, and they have, they definitely don't have a government that is interested in uplifting the country, benefiting the people, and working on fixing the problems that India is afflicted with.
A series of historical and mainly historical, I would say, conditions of India, of having never truly unified like China had, and also having been colonized physically completely by Britain for 200, 300 years, whereas China only had 100 years of humiliation. India had 300.
And I mean, speaking of India, there is a really racist documentary going around called "India is the Worst Place on Earth," I believe it's called. And I mean, I don't endorse it, and I felt like I needed to take a shower, but I couldn't look away. I started watching it, I couldn't look away. It was just awful. Today, right now, on the Ganges, there's dead bodies floating down the river. There are dogs eating corpses in India right now. There's birds eating dead people as we speak. It's got problems. It's got huge problems. There's so many problems. and the Indian people, like the Indian government, isn't interested in addressing them.
What the
at
Indian
least
government
not-
is interested in, is interested in, is using that, using these conditions to fuel ultra nationalism and to fuel this like absolutely hollow and fake sense of superiority in Indian right wingers, in this like absolutely counterfactual, absolutely fantastic fantasy, like take a Delulu times 1000, right? And there's also another documentary I would recommend. It's from an Indian, maybe Marxist actually, but definitely a leftist, called "Why Everyone Hates India," and it talks about this, how these conditions are actually used by the right, by the BJP Hindu fascists to bolster this fake kind of bravado, this pomposity of that you see with Indians online, the right wingers. Yeah, it's crazy.
Greg, you're such a good listener, and it's probably because you're a professional psychologist that you're a good listener. But do you have any thoughts you want to share? I'm always talking over people, and I feel
Can you tell me what my problem is, Greg?
I don't want to know my problem. It's better if I just remain oblivious. But any thoughts, overall general thoughts? Iran, China, India, Greg? I'm sorry to put you on the spot.
That's okay. No, I'm pretty bereft of thoughts at the moment.
Okay. So no, Greg, I appreciate this discussion. I mean, we're an hour and 51 minutes in. I don't know if we should just maybe end it here, but yeah, it's very interesting times. Iran, I mean, we're gonna find out maybe before Friday. If I expect the United States to join in before Friday. I don't think they're gonna wait. This war of attrition, it's battering Israel. Israel is I don't think gonna be able to continue to take this, and so they're gonna demand that the United States intervene sooner rather than later, in my opinion. And then we're gonna see how Iran responds, and we could have a lot of movement by Friday. And so that's my biggest thought as I leave the show. But any final
let me
thoughts?
jump in. Final,
please.
The other option for the U.S., if it sees Israel getting pounded, is to go to get a ceasefire or a peace through the UN, or just telling Israel to stop, which will get Iran to relent.
Yeah. So I mean, Trump could negotiate a ceasefire and declare victory. But that would be very tough. Like, that is going to be very tough, considering
in the
how
past,
far
the U.S. has had the Security Council pass a ceasefire and then get Israel.
I heard that Iran tried to submit a discussion at the Security Council, which was vetoed by the United States yesterday. They tried to raise the issue, and the U.S. said, "No, we're not going to entertain that issue at the Security Council." But they could. I mean, that is an option rather than have the United States start bombing Iran. I'm just thinking, with all the rhetoric, one is way more likely to happen than the other. But you could be absolutely correct. Final thoughts, Ian, Leo?
Well, thanks. It was a good show. I'm sorry I was distracted a few times. Normally, I have my girlfriends to distract the pets, but today I'm actually alone in the house, so the dog kept coming to me because I'm the only human. I didn't notice. Here.
I saw Spaz once on camera, and
I had to check out. I had to check out quite a few times during the show because normally he just comes to her and annoys her, but it was just me. Because we actually bought a vacation home in Crimea, actually. And she's actually there now. She went there by herself to get the keys and get the place set up, and I stayed in Moscow with the pets.
Okay. Yo, party at Ian's, bro.
Yeah,
party
no, I can't.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a party here now. Yeah, so it's me, cat, and dog. And the dog is he's a needy guy. Normally he goes to her during the show. But
No, I mean all of us are coming to Crimea to party.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, there you go. Party in Crimea. Well, that's what the NATO guys were saying. They would have a party in 2023. They were saying summer of 2023. You can find the
Not that kind of party, real one.
Yes. Yes. So
Leo, you're gonna be our DJ at the party, and also you have a pet too, right? I saw you petting your cat.
Yeah.
Cookie?
I'm going to do some Russian hard bass mixed with African beats. Yeah, that Russian hard bass stuff is pretty. It's funny. It could be used a little more development, but I like it. I like some of it. It's really catchy. But Puka is good.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Puka is good.
I was gonna say that I'm gonna nix that exotic shit. I just want 80s. Just play some 80s music.
Yeah, there's 80s, amazing 80s African music that never gets played ever. Okay. Like that's I tell you, like 1,000.
I will entertain it, but that's not exactly what I had in mind. But I'll try anything out.
Yeah, I'll send you some 80s stuff. You will recognize it as 80s, but it would sound like things that you know, except like once you get into it, you would realize it's 1,000 times better.
Okay. I lack any kind of artistic taste. Carlo is always the art aficionado with an opinion on all things art.
No. Everybody can.
No, music. I have opinions on music.
Everybody knows what's good. Like ultimately, if you have enough time to, Anyway.
Greg, Leo, we will have you guys back soon. Ian, I hope to see you Friday.
I'll be here Friday.
Till then, let's raise our fist in solidarity. I'll see you guys then. Thank you very much.
Solidarity with Iran.